We start today with our first episode of the Red Sea Dossier, where we analyze all the affairs of the Red Sea, things that is actually it appears as individual or isolated um, incidents is all relate to each other, and we in this dossier we will analyze every aspect of this incident and how it is all connected. Today, I'm really glad and I'm really pleased that they have one of the prominent journalists, a good friend of mine, Oscar Rickett, and from the Middle East Eye. Um, the Middle East Eye, I do have a very personal attachment to, because when in my captivity and afterwards, they are the most people actually did cover it, and they played a big role in covering what's happening in Sudan uh, and the suffering of the people in Sudan, more than the other mainstream media. So I'm personally in debt to them and to the Telegraph for doing most of the work of which is supposed to be covered by everybody of the human suffering in Sudan and in the region, and that shows that is their commitment for the truth and to bring out the real voice of the people on the ground, the suffering of the people, without any agenda behind it, like what's going on around the world right now in the mainstream media. So, welcome with me, Oscar, and I'm glad to have you with me, Oscar.
Thank you very much, Yaslam. That's very kind.
So, in Sudan, for example, and in the which is started the first one in the modern in the since the 20th, the 2020 and upwards. Sudan was the biggest crisis that take place and the biggest war. Um, but then it is followed straight away with Gaza, and after Gaza, then you have Yemen, which is was taking place since 2015, 2016. Uh, but the escalation of it, the accusation of the ports around the Red Sea, and that start triggering a lot of flags. That is, all these are connected. So why the Red Sea?
Why the Red Sea? Um, it's interesting. There was a British explorer in the 19th century called Richard Burton, not to be confused with the actor who had the same name. And he referred to the port of Berbera um, in Somaliland, which of course is in the news a lot at the moment. He referred to the port of Berbera as the true key of the Red Sea, the center of East African traffic. And I think that there's always been, and particularly since the construction of the Suez Canal, there's always been a lot of interest in the Red Sea, in the Gulf of Aden, in the Bab al Mandab Strait. The Bab al Mandab Strait is known as the Gate of Tears, the Veil of Tears, and this is a maritime choke point. Um, this is a maritime choke point that exists. It's kind of, it's when you're going down through the Suez Canal out into the Gulf of Aden, and it's the sea becomes narrow there, and it's where about 30% of the world's oil goes through, um, and slightly less, but it's still a significant amount of the world's maritime traffic go through it. And so if you can control this part of the world, if you can control this maritime route, then you have quite a lot of power. And in the days of the British Empire, it was the East India Company first that was that looked to control this route and that did control this route. And there is a kind of volcanic, an uninhabited volcanic outcrop in the Bab el Mandeb Strait called Mayun, which originally was held by the East India Company, and then until very recently, and probably actually still now, has been held by the United Arab Emirates, which, of course, as you know, is the main external actor in the war in Sudan, not the only one, but the main one, and is the main patron of the Rapid Support Forces paramilitary. Now, what has happened in the last month in the Red Sea and in the Gulf of Aden is potentially game changing in terms of the war in Sudan, because and now some of my reporting last year for Middle East Eye had looked at we had taken and analyzed satellite imagery over a period of years that showed that the United Arab Emirates had built up military and intelligence bases with the help of Israel and the United States all around the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. And so this was in southern Yemen, where it had done this in territory that was kind of nominally controlled by the Southern Transitional Council, and we'll get to them in a little bit, because they have now been kicked out by the Saudis, by Tariq Saleh, the Yemeni military commander, and then in Somaliland and Puntland, which are two regions of Somalia which have their own governments and want to break away from the Somali government in Mogadishu. Now, the main bases were in, and so you then had these bases dotted around this area, and they were in on the main island of Socotra, and then on two islands called Abd al-Kuri and Sama, on Mayun, which is the outcrop that I just mentioned, Mocha, which is a port in southern Yemen, and then in Berbera and Bosaso, which are in the regions of Somalia. And these bases acted as a kind of ring, essentially a ring of control for the United Arab Emirates in that part of the world. And what the UAE and also Israel was interested in doing was combating the Houthis in that region, particularly after the Houthis had begun launching attacks on shipping in the area following the outbreak of the war on Gaza, the genocide in Gaza. The Emiratis were also using these bases, particularly Bosaso, to fly military shipments to the RSF in Sudan, and they have two bases inside Sudan, one in North Darfur and one in the south of Darfur. So I think that over, and of course the creation of the UAE as the trucial state by the British was intimately linked to this control of one of the world's main maritime routes. That long before oil was ever discovered in what is now the UAE, the British had a presence there because of this trade route. So why the Red Sea? The Red Sea has always been important for trade, particularly in the modern era, and it is now the site of a kind of new imperial struggle between the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And Sudan is part of that.
Yeah, and I remember in Sudan history that Sawakin, one of the traditional or the port in Sudan, was controlled by the Ottoman Empire, was their main navy base in the region, which is one of the ports now Turkey is working on as what they call it historical port, which is they used to control. And that shows for the last 200, 300 years, the importance of that corridor for the international trade. And since the start of the Suez Canal and the three, what you call it, three, the war in that time regarding the Suez Canal itself, to who control it and who actually benefit from it. And recently was the swap of the islands in the Red Sea itself between Saudi Arabia and Egypt, Tehran and Sanafir. And also that also that didn't make sense in the beginning. That is, Egypt is just giving up some of strategic islands. Even the decision is unpopular in Egypt, and the Egyptians resisting that transition. But it did also raise a lot of questions about what is the value of adding these islands. But apparently it is to increase the influence of Saudi Arabia in the Red Sea.
Yeah.
And like you said, Barbara is, in Arabic they call it, that small narrow corridor is called Bab al Mandab. It's between Somalia and Yemen, which is very close to each other. So whoever controlled that they could control the whole corridor. So
yeah, and I think it's important, Yassam, to say that there are many powers interested in this. Sudan has it's a 750-kilometer Red Sea coastline, and long before the 2023 war began, we were reporting. My Sudanese colleague Mohammed Amin was reporting on the presence of Russians, Turks, of course the Emiratis. There was all sorts of interest.
the Chinese, don't forget the Chinese.
The Chinese. I mean, I remember one story he did, Mohammed Amin did, in, I think it was maybe 2021 or something. And he had spoken to a fisherman in the far southeast of Sudan on the Red Sea coast. And this fisherman had gone out to do his usual kind of fishing round. And there were a couple of very small uninhabited islands off the coast. And some white men, he described them as, white men in boats with armed men, had come and kind of, told him to get out of there. And it was his kind of assumption or his guess that these guys were from were from the Wagner group. And meanwhile, you also had Turkey establishing a presence on one of these islands as well. So it's a sort of it's and I think that, like, you know, at that point, before, I remember as a sort of journalist covering Sudan, at that point before the war, this story felt like something very mysterious and quite remote. And now it feels as though, as you're kind of saying with this series, it really feels like the Red Sea is a crucial part of this, and the control of the Red Sea is a crucial part of it. And I think it goes to something, maybe something wider that's happening, which is that this world of global capitalism, in which supply lines, you know, are, you know, supply lines are everything, you know, trade routes, you know, these sort of networks of supply are very important. And if they get disrupted and if they get held up, then things begin to fray and they begin to break down. You know, if we look at what Trump is doing with Venezuela, what's happened in Gaza, and now what he's threatening to do in Greenland, you have, and this is beginning to be acknowledged by, you know, the sort of mainstream neoliberal politicians, people like Mark Carney, the Canadian premier, coming out and saying this week at Davos that this world order is over. And now you have a very clearly a kind of return to the kind of great power politics that we saw in the 19th century, that we saw maybe certainly up until the First World War, but maybe up until the Second World War. And it, you know, I would think about it in the terms of the region we're thinking about. I would think about it as an age of kings. Mohammed bin Zayed in the UAE, Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, it should look like it. Yeah.
President Sisi, Donald Trump, President Erdogan. These people, they may not all be, they may not be, you know, crowned kings, but they are kings, right? You know, in the sort of true sense of a word, right? They and you can see that, you know, this may be how, you know, they're looking to try, you know, Modi in India. I mean, you've seen Modi meeting with Mohammed bin Zayed this week, and all of these leaders are now beginning to, I mean, this fallout between Saudi Arabia and the UAE has polarized, has split the region. And what you're looking at in the countries of the Horn of Africa and across North Africa, and indeed across most of the African continent, is you're looking at countries often that have very long histories and often have quite large and powerful armies, but they are now making decisions based on which super rich Gulf power they are going to side with. Is it going to be the Saudis or the UAE? And I mean, that's a very, I don't know. I mean, it's actually a very depressing situation, but it is the situation at the moment, you know, where essentially in Sudan, for example, where the UAE has supported the RSF since before the war began in April 2023, where its relationship with the Dagalo family is very long running. Now, in order to try and counter that, throughout the war, the Sudanese armed forces have been looking, you know, they've been trying to get more support from Egypt, trying to get more support from Turkey. They're getting that support, but now they are also able to look to Saudi Arabia to counteract this very long-standing support that the UAE has had for the RSF, And then in the region, what you have is more or less you have the Egyptians, the Algerians, the Somalis lining up with the Saudis. And then you have the Ethiopians and the Kenyans,
Ugandans,
the Ugandans
yeah,
lining up with the UAE. In Chad, the situation is a bit more complicated because the Chadian army is beginning to come into conflict with the RSF.
yeah.
And
The recent incident, yes.
the situation has always been a little bit unusual and a bit unsettled because at the beginning of the war, Deby, the president in Chad, his preference was not to side with the RSF. He feared regime change inside Chad, led by the Dagalo family or instigated by the Dagalo family, but the UAE bought him over.
Yeah, that was
How long that
unnatural as
lasts?
well. Yeah.
How long that lasts is that Central African Republic, of course, is part of it as well. But
South Sudan.
South. I mean, South Sudan, I think is an. I think South Sudan is still having it is having to work with both sides, and when I say that, I mean it's having to work with the SAF and the RSF, and you can see that at the Heglig oil fields, where of course the SAF and the RSF have done a deal between each other. So, we shouldn't forget that the two sides in this war are also able to work with each other at certain points. So this is the situation, and it's a how long the Saudis and the Emiratis will be at loggerheads in conflict with each other. It's interesting because what people are telling me is that the Saudis are furious. They are very, very angry. But I don't know. But I don't know how long that will last. And I think in the meantime, I think the war in Sudan is going to get more violent, and that's a huge concern for civilians because there may be more civilian death as a result of it.
Yeah, that's one of the things which didn't get that much covering. But in regarding Sudan and the war in Sudan and so the Saudi in the beginning they took a sort of intermediate position, but don't forget Saudi Arabia from the beginning was part of the quartet, which is pressured the SAF and Sudanese civilian movements and so on, other than Tasis or Taqaddum or the one which is allies with RSF, to accept an accord that triggered the war in the first place, and which is the Saudi Emirati relation is exactly the same like the Dibbi's Muhammad Dibbi position. That was unnatural. The natural behavior of Dibbi is supposed normally is he's supposed to be against the RSF, because the RSF, part of it, big part of the RSF is the rebels, which is what were fighting him in power, to remove him from power. It's the same Arab tribes that is extend between Sudan and Chad. The same concept is actually between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The strategic enemy of Saudi Arabia historically was always, since the start of the creation of the UAE, was the UAE. And it's the most country that the Saudi Arabia did enter into war with. Border, yeah, it's not war, it's just small skirmishes and so on, but still, And the UAE was always a thorn on the side of Saudi Arabia. So when they allied together, that was unnatural, to be honest with you. And the action that for since 23, I was trying to understand, um, was uh, this this regional wars, was it to control Saudi Arabia as one of the leading countries in the region because of the oil, because of the position of Saudi Arabia, because of the leadership of the Islamic world, and so on, or something else? So I thought that is this it's an attempt to surround Saudi Arabia, and the same time, um, Egypt, to strangle Egypt from the south and the west, like what's going on in Libya. But now it's became very apparent that it's not just Saudi Arabia or Egypt. It's the whole region. Is from Bab el Mandeb all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, which is the Red Sea, and the corridor, the position, the harbors, the security is critical for security as well, the international security. Um, and Somalia does play big role. And what revealed the whole thing is the recent uh, defeats that actually the RSF was taking, and the pressure on the UAE, the international pressure, the media coverage that is, hey, what is the UAE is doing is is breaking the international law. It's a crime against humanity, and it's committing genocide in Sudan, and so on. And bit by bit, they start backing off for a while. Then they popped up in Yemen and in Somalia in the same time, and that make it very clear, very obvious that is the idea is to control that corridor. I remember in 2018, 2017, when the UAE's first was Russia to wanted a harbor in the Red Sea, as agreed with Bashir government in Sudan. Uh, and Bashir did agree in 2014, 15 with the Turkish to rehabilitate Sawakin as a historical port, but that means the Turkish will use it, even though the government in Sudan denied that it's going to be a Turkish base. Um, then I remember Osama Dawood, the Sudanese billionaire.
Mm.
He came and asked for a port in the north of Port Sudan, Abu Umama port, which is he was willing to invest over 5 billion to start that port, which is a 5 billion he doesn't have, and was very clear that is the UAE is behind that port. When was rejected, the same place the RSF came and put their hand on, and they said that we're starting a navy, and we need that place as a port. Uh, Funny enough, one of the one of the captives was with me in the room. We stayed with me like 2 weeks. Was Colonel Khalid Dangal. Khalid Dangal is a commander of the RSF Navy, what called Navy, and his deputy Khalid Zaid. Both of them, they were with me in the room when I was captive, and they were stationed in Khartoum
Mm.
because of the Sudanese army didn't allow any base, and also the people in the east, they went and demonstrated against RSF not to have any base in the Red Sea
Mm.
and so on. But it was very apparent that there is Emirati huge interest to have a footstep in the Sudanese shore, to have a port there, what's called port, and to use it as for trade. But it's very clear it's not going to be for trade. You followed that is what you talked about their interest to acquire port there,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
The Chinese, they started already dialogue with Sudanese government to have also a base there, in the free zone, what is called the free zone, about 30 something kilometers from Port Sudan, the south of Port Sudan, 18 kilometers from Port Sudan airport. But also, the Chinese, they have most of Al Ain al Sukhna, that is in Egypt, the southern of
Right.
Egypt. The port there is is built by the Chinese, and they control most of the free zone there. So you have the Chinese in the western side, you have the Russian and the Emiratis in Egypt as well. You have the Emiratis in Eritrea. They do have a base there, which is very soon they will be out because of Eritrea is siding with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, but I wouldn't, I mean, I was told, I mean, this is the basis Assad, but I mean, I was told that last year the Ethiopians came very close to invading, and that would have been, with the support of the UAE, and maybe even at the behest of the UAE. And this is obviously again something to look at this year. Will there be an Ethiopian invasion of Eritrea? Because I Ethiopia's current support now for the RSF is sort of becoming clearer. We have reported today in Middle East Eye about planes flying between Abu Dhabi, Israel, Bahrain, and the Harameda Ethiopian Air Base. We're looking to report further on the presence of an RSF training camp quite near to the border with Sudan's Blue Nile state. And my understanding from Ethiopian sources is that this help that the Ethiopians are providing the RSF will, in return, they will be helped by the Emiratis and maybe the RSF in invading Eritrea. And of course, obviously, we know Eritrea and Ethiopia have a long-standing enmity. They were, Eritrea didn't formally gain its independence until 1991. And again, this will be, and Ethiopia is landlocked, and of course that has been a problem for governments in Addis Ababa for a long time. And
Yeah,
at the moment, about 90% of their maritime trade goes out through Djibouti, but they're also, they're looking to maybe shift some of that to Somaliland. And then if they can get access to Eritrea, but also if they could get access to Eastern Sudan, I mean, the RSF, as we understand it, the RSF will be looking to invade Blue Nile, but maybe also to try and make a path from there to the Red Sea coast. It would be very difficult. But it's not out of the question. And so again, Yaslan, there's this kind of this presence of the Red Sea. I mean, we've written sort of since the beginning of the war and before about the over, the interest that the Emir. I mean, when you look at the UAE and Sudan, how much it's put into this war, the question is often like, why? Why does it mean so much to them? And of course, there's lots of different answers, and maybe some of them have some truth and some of them don't. Gold, fighters, agricultural land, all important. Sudan's place in the wider Islamic world, the Emirati, the strong Emirati opposition to anything that could look like political Islam. But the Red Sea is very important part of it. Long-standing Emirati desire to be involved, to have a real presence on the Red Sea, either militarily or through DP World. DP World, one of the, possibly the biggest kind of port infrastructure company in the world. I'm sitting here in London, and not very far from me, at a place called Tilbury, is a massive port that is owned by the Emiratis through DP World, and they've automated most of it, and the place is a ghost town now. So again, you can't talk about this war without talking also about the kind of machinery of global capitalism, and that is very, very present in maritime trade. And again, the Red Sea is key to it.
Yeah, in that excuse for the UAE to say about the Islamic political Islam and so on is just nonsense, because Bashir was the representative of that uh, Islamic political Islam, and he was part of the Islamic movement, NCP. He's the leader of the NCP. When he reached an agreement to step down, the UAE is the specifically MBZ is the one convinced him to stay. Bashir was an ally of the UAE, so that they are fighting the Muslim Brotherhood and so on. That's nonsense. It's just a nonsense. The other thing is, RSF commanders, all of them, they are the leaders in the NCP. The guy who was in charge of us in captivity, Ali Dakharu. Ali Dakharu was the one of the top leaders in the Islamic movement, and he was the head of the students association in the Islamic movement, one of the leaders in the NCP. The Bashir deputy, the vice president, one of his assistants, he is now number 2 or number 3 in RSF. Hemeti is part of NCP, one of the leaders in NCP. So that concept of fighting the political Islam and so this just it is it's to speak to appeal to the narrative of we are countering terrorism and the Islamic terrorism and so on, which is nonsense. But the whole region, in the Red Sea region, if you control the Red Sea and you control Sudan specifically, that means you're controlling the north half of Africa, literally, because of the tribal spread in Sudan. Sudan is a small version of North Africa, Most of the tribes or the people who travel from Central Africa, the mid half of Africa, Tanzania, Congo, and Uganda, all these countries, and then you go all the west, all the way to Mauritania and to Nigeria, Niger, Mali, uh, Senegal. Now, the movement of people in the past, they used to go to Hajj. They travel by land, so they have to go through Sudan to cross the Red Sea and come back the Red Sea again. And most of them they settle in Sudan. Either they didn't finish the journey, or when in their way back, they'll find it's a good land, it's big, and not many people. Sudan was the largest African and Arabs or Islamic country. It was the largest. Um, it was number 9 in the world in size. But when you look at the people ratio related to the land, one of the lowest, because before Sudan is split, the total number of Sudanese people, they used to be around between 35 to 40 million back then. And before that, it used to be in the 20s, 20 millions, when the people movement going to Saudi Arabia for Hajj or Umrah and so on, and they settled in Sudan. Now that gave Sudan immense wealth in diversity in people, different tribes like Fulani, like the Hausa, like the Falata, and so on. These West African tribes, they are not indigenous there, but that gave Sudan a soft diplomacy, because these tribes all the way to the west, they they control these countries and so on, and they are really still connected, very, because it's recent movements, so they're still connected to their motherlands and so on, and that is huge for Sudan. So by controlling Sudan, you're literally controlling the north of Africa, um, by soft diplomacy. The other, but also that sub-Sahara corridor is from all the way from the east of Africa all the way to the west of Africa. It's just open corridor, and that I entered in a lot of discussion with the Chinese, um, because they are adamant to have access to Sudan. They are really adamant. I used to do business with them, and uh, and they always keep telling me that Sudan is the key. Sudan is the key way to Africa. Sudan is the doorway to Africa. We need to have a very good relation with Sudan. That's why they bumped a lot of money with Bashir time, without guarantees, without anything. Um, and I believe that is what the UAE was seeking.
Right. Yeah.
That is that access. And
Right.
plus, of course, plus the gold is not big issue for the UAE. They will get it in any way, because Sudan was always the only place they export the gold to is the UAE. Even though when it's
Right.
smuggled, they smuggle to the UAE.
It'll
So
happen through.
they're getting it anyway. So it's not to control the gold.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah. I think
so
that's right.
I think it's just control of the region, and they want to
Mm.
use Sudan as the vehicle that they use for that. But Sudan was just one example. You have Yemen, and um, the atrocities they cause in order just to control that corridor. The destruction of Yemen, dismantling it, splitting the people, creating small militias. Now in Somalia is the same thing, is splitting Somalia, breaking Djibouti out of Somalia,
Yeah.
and now Somalia is fractured into multiple regions, and each one want to break off. Then you have in Yemen again, Socotra, the island there, that now Ethiopia with Eritrea, and splitting Sudan. So it's in order to control that corridor or control the Red Sea, it's creating huge havoc in the region, and that affecting people in their millions.
Yeah.
Displaced, the most displaced people, by the way, people they don't realize that Somali people.
Yeah, well, we have Somalis everywhere, and you can see in America now, of course, Trump and JD Vance, they're turning the Somali people into an enemy within. The amount of racism that is being leveled at Somalis in America is extraordinary. It's despicable. Um, and I think, Yaslam, you're sort of identifying something here, which is the amount of trauma and pain and chaos that is being created just, you know, essentially in order to kind of, I mean, it's of course, it's a potentially big prize, controlling one of the main maritime corridors, controlling the sort of levers of global trade. But I mean, millions and millions of people, including in Sudan, are suffering partly as a result of this. And they don't, people just want to, most people, they just want to, live a peaceful life. And yet, in the middle of a world, in this place here, but we're seeing this everywhere now. There are 58,000 people in Greenland. What do you think they want from their life? They don't want to, there's, in Gaza, where people were already living in an open air prison, and now, I mean, it's a situation where, in a world that, again, where the gap between the wealthy elite and the rest of us gets bigger and bigger, and where also the gap between what people want and what their leaders are doing gets bigger. We have this in Britain as well. It's not quite as, it's not quite as serious, but it's people can see what's happening in the world, and then they can see how their leaders are responding to these things, and the interests of small elites, of the desire to control resources and money. It is, of course, these things have been present for a long time, but right now, and when we look at the Red Sea, it's very it's very dangerous. And what happens next is, you know, it's hard to predict right now, but you know, it it could be about to get a lot more violent, I think.
Yeah, but if we do like what you're doing, shed a light on it, bring
Mm,
awareness, because like this kind of investment, it does happen in the dark, in the vacuums.
yeah.
But now, but the more we shed light to it, the more we can actually um, get the people realizing that is how the amount of suffering, the pain, like looking like in Gaza,
Mm,
the change that brought to the world. Yes, the Gazan they did suffer immensely, but
mm,
they awakened the whole Earth's population. they start realizing, even who was expecting, that is most of, for example, if you go to the extreme, to MAGA in the United States, who expected that is senior MAGA people, they flip on 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 Trump because of Gaza, because of the atrocities they see, and because of people speaking out. I did. I don't know. You didn't get your copy, but I did mention that in this book, in my book, the Behind the Curtains, where I do speak about that is the few elite who controlling the world, and they using us as like monopoly, trading countries, trading wars, triggering wars, try to control corridors, control resources, and it is all about gain of wealth and power for a few. Um, this actually, as a first episode, it's just we're just laying the ground
Yeah.
um, on the what's going on in the Red Sea, but we need to dissect each each country by itself. What's going on in there? What's have the what's the relation between these countries and the atrocities there, the amount of atrocities, and who is benefiting,
Mm.
and who's causing all this havoc in
Yeah.
reality, who is behind it, and
Yeah.
how
And
we stop it.
well, that is yeah. I mean, the developments recently have been pretty extraordinary. That the UAE's kind of ring of bases in the region has been broken up more or less. But at the same time, Israel coming out to formally recognize Somaliland. Now, Somaliland is, it is its own territory. It was a British colony. It wasn't an Italian colony. It has, there is a separate identity in it. So it has its own claims for self-determination. And I think for Somalilanders, there's this feeling of, certainly I've heard from Somalilanders who said, well, look, every other Arab country has relationships with Israel. They just don't talk about it. So, but it's very clear what Israel is doing. Israel, again, wants an increased presence around the Bab el-Mandab Strait. It wants to have an increased presence, along with the Emiratis. This UAE-Israel alliance is key here.
I was going
There's
to ask you that question. Is that the
yeah.
UAE by
So
itself?
I mean, the UAE was the first. It normalized its relations as part of the Abraham Accords at the end of the first Trump term in office in 2020. But the relationship before then, Israeli diplomats have told me, the relationship before then was quiet, but it was significant. This relationship, it existed before the normalization, before the public normalization. And then since then, the Israelis and the UAE have worked on more and more projects together. They have an intelligence sharing platform called Crystal Ball. They have conducted joint maritime exercises together. And these bases that I mentioned in Socotra, Abdul Khuri, Mayun, Sama, Basaso, Berbera, all of these bases, they're UAE bases, but Israel was involved in them. Israeli military personnel have been on the ground in some of them. Israeli intelligence is part of it. There is an early warning radar system deployed in the UAE, and I think in Bahrain as well, that will warn Israel when or if, Houthi or Iranian missiles are fired in their direction. And so there is a network, there is an infrastructure, security apparatus, intelligence cooperation between the UAE and Israel that is very developed, very serious. And in Somaliland, so the UAE has its base at Berbera, with the key port in Somaliland. Israel wants a base there as well. Israel already has a presence in Somaliland. On the 26th of December last year, Israel becomes the first country in the world to formally recognize the sovereignty of Somaliland. Then Gideon Saar, the foreign minister, is in Somaliland, goes to Somaliland, goes to Hargeisa, the capital, goes to Berbera. And, this thing is moving quickly. The Israelis want a presence there, and have a presence there. And so now, the Saudi conflict is not just with the UAE, it's with Israel. And in fact, it may be much more with Israel than with the UAE. And now we also have, we have tracked planes going from Israeli military bases through UAE to Ethiopia. And so that potentially implicates Israel in support for the RSF. I was speaking to someone in Nairobi recently, and he was saying how surprised he was at the extent of Israel's penetration in East Africa, in the Horn of Africa. And, it's again, I think the idea behind the Abraham Accords, at least in Benjamin Netanyahu's mind and in the minds of many in the, in sort of right-wing Israeli establishment, is that if you can develop formal ties with enough Arab Islamic nations, then you can isolate the Palestinians and leave them friendless, and that will eventually enable you to completely ethnically cleanse them. There are obviously rumors that Israel wants to move the Palestinians in Gaza to Somaliland. I'd be very surprised if that happens. I'd be very surprised if Somaliland even ends up agreeing to it. But the presence of these rumors tells you something, I think. It's not just conspiracy. And so, yeah, of course, when we talk about the Red Sea, we also have to talk about Israel. And also because, the Houthis, the Iran-backed movement in Yemen, the Houthis have proven to be a kind of difficult opponent for the Israelis. And the Israelis are looking to counteract them. Just as the West is more generally, because the West does not want to see maritime shipping through that region that we've been talking about seriously disrupted. And the Houthis did disrupt it very seriously. So, at the moment, yeah, there's focus on Berbera, there's focus on Somaliland. And, there's this, the dynamics in the Red Sea are also going to be affected by growing ties between, but by Egypt moving maybe in the Saudi direction away from the UAE. Right now, in Libya, for example, the Haftar family is under pressure from the Saudis to stop supporting the RSF, to stop facilitating the UAE's transfer of weaponry to the RSF. So that's something else that's going on. That's something else that will affect the region. It is sort of, the Gulf Imperium, these, Western diplomat told me a few months ago, he said, if you want to know what the UAE is doing, then you should read The Anarchy, which is a book by the Scottish historian William Dalrymple about the East India Company. And he said it's the same playbook, using mercenaries, using financial power to control maritime routes. And I think that's what it's been trying to do. But recently it's come up against a problem, because the SDC has been kicked out of southern Yemen, and it's been kicked out of Socotra. And that means that the UAE's presence there is in jeopardy. The Somali government in Mogadishu is trying to kick it out of Berbera and out of Bosaso. We've reported on Emirati military personnel leaving those two ports and going to Ethiopia. So this is what's happening right now in the Red Sea and in the Horn of Africa.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and really is a start for, I believe, very detailed. We need to go through into a very detailed analysis, especially in Yemen, because Yemen, it took it took long time, and people, they don't know about the suffering of the Yemeni people. But Emirati there, they've been working for decades in Yemen. It didn't start in 2015, 2016 war. It started well before that. And that need to be looked at, and we need to cover that as well. Now, that's very interesting start. A lot to cover.
Yeah.
And to take in.
Yeah. Thank you, Aslam.
In 1 hour.
Hopefully I've set you up for the series. Let's see.
It's not just set me up, but it's for the view as well. There's a lot to take in and to see and realize about what's going on in that region.
Yeah.
Which is being under this kind of atrocities for decades.
Yeah, but I think it's everything is happening there now. I
Yeah,
mean, there's things happening everywhere at the moment, and this is the weird thing about being a journalist at the moment. Something huge is happening in almost everywhere.
Yeah. So
there's a lot going on in this part of the world right now, and I think that what happens this year will be crucial to what happens in the future.
Yeah, but in the same time, there is a lot of awakening happening in the
That's
people.
True. I
Before
hope so.
that, the people, they were not interested in, and they're not bothered with what's going on, especially in countries that far from them. They just see it in the news. Now it is affecting everybody.
It is.
And
That's
especially
right.
with the movement of people,
Yeah.
the immigration, and now things happening in South Africa, affecting people in the UK.
Yeah,
in a
definitely.
way or another. And the speed of it is really fast. Yeah,
that's right.
Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you very
was
much.
really great, and really shed a lot of light on what's going on in there. Thanks a lot, Oscar.
My pleasure. Thank you, Yaslam.
Thank you. All the best.
All the best.